Cold War is often told as a story of two superpowers, Washington and Moscow, locked in a global titanic struggle. However, what if this narrative misses the most crucial part of the story? What if the end of the Cold War was shaped not just in the corridors of power, but in the borderlands of the global south? My article, Pakistani Conflictual World-Making in International Politics, challenges the Eurocentric view of the late Cold War. It argues that Pakistan and Pakistani state and society were not just passive pawns, but rather active protagonists that fundamentally reshaped global order during the Afghan-Soviet War. Through this research, I introduce two key concepts, conflictual world-making and imperial anti-imperial relationism, to explain how this happened. So, what is conflictual world-making? It's the process through which post-colonial states and societies don't just respond or react to empire and great power, but rather actively and often in contradictory ways contest and reshape world orders. In Pakistan's case, this was a world-making defined by a fundamental schism. On one hand, the military state became an agent of world enforcing. It partnered with the CIA and Saudi Arabia to operationalize a US-led anti-communist insurgency in Afghanistan. It used its borderlands as a launchpad for a massive covert war, the largest covert war in modern-day history, instrumentalizing religious nationalism to serve a Western-led imperial order. But on the other hand, these very borderlands between Pakistan and Afghanistan were historic sites of counter-hegemony. For decades before the war, socialist and anti-imperial movements like the Mazdur Kisan Party and the Balochistan People's Liberation Front were pursuing their own world-making projects, their own alternative world-making projects. They were connected to global currents of decolonisation and socialist internationalism, articulating visions of liberation that challenged both the Pakistani state and the binary of the Cold War. This tension is what I theorize as imperial anti-imperial relationism, the dialectical entanglement where imperial and anti-imperial forces co-constitute one another, long after the high tide of anti-colonial nationalism. Pakistan's state, in its effort to enforce one world order, simultaneously suppressed another and simultaneously unleashed a third world-making project, that of jihadism and Islamist internationalism. So, to uncover the competing projects, my article uses the Mazdur Kisan Party's Circular and the Baloch Liberation Front's Jabal, two revolutionary periodicals of the 1970s. It uses these, and it also uses state archives in an interdisciplinary methodology, which draws upon these revolutionary movement periodicals, which are newspapers and pamphlets of these borderland groups and their political parties and their revolutionary ideas. So these texts were not just reports, they were active sites of world making. They articulated a political theory from the margins, linking local, peasant, borderland, minority, working class struggles in Pakistan to global revolutions in Vietnam, Palestine, and across the world. Therefore, analyzing these periodicals allows us to see how these actors understood their place in a global struggle, theorizing the links between the post-colonial state, feudalism, political violence, and international capital. This evidence reveals that the Pakistani state's suppression of these leftist and anti-imperial movements in the 1970s was a deliberate foreclosure of an alternative future, a future that was then replaced by the state-sponsored, religiously charged jihad of the 1980s. So, you may ask, what is the impact of this research? Well, this article fundamentally recasts the Afghan-Soviet War. It was not a mere proxy war, but a decisive crucible where late Cold War geopolitics collided with the unfinished project of decolonization and imperial legacies, the consequences of which are still with us today. The security template perfected during the Afghan-Soviet War, proxy war, social engineering, the fusion of intelligence agencies with militant networks, didn't just end in 1989 with the ending of the Afghan-Soviet War and the ending of the Cold War. It was seamlessly adapted for the 21st century, from the drone campaigns of the War on Terror to the special operations we see across West Asia and the Swana region today. By centering Pakistan's conflictual world-making, this article does more than just offer a new history. It provides a theoretical framework for understanding modern international politics outside of Eurocentric and state-centric frameworks. One that insists that we look to the generative margins of the global South, where empires are resisted, remade, and where the future of world order is so often written. To understand the full argument and its implications for international relations theory, post-colonial studies, and Cold War history, I encourage you to read the full article in the Review of International Studies. Thank you.